And we're going to discuss about how dubbing isn't just about, matching mouth and lips, and that it's about translating tone, emotion, and culture and language. And we are definitely very lucky to have three wonderful, amazing guests and good friends of mine. I'm not going to go through all their bios because the amount of work that they've done, if we go over it, it's going to take half the session. So I'm just going to let them just introduce themselves really quickly and their role in the dubbing world. And then we're going to get started with some questions. So I think let's start with Brandon. Brandon, go ahead.
I knew it. I knew it.
Well, I saw your mic is on, so I figured.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brandon English. I am a casting director, producer, and a director over at Roundabout Entertainment. I've worked with clients such as Netflix, Amazon, Paramount, Disney, Hulu. Pretty much a good chunk of the clients that are out there for dubbing at this point. And I'm really lucky to have worked with most of the folks in this space too. So
He's also an amazing actor. Um,
yeah.
let's Kate, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, so you'll see a theme, I think, of a lot of us having worn a lot of different hats in this industry because it started out very small. So I'm primarily a director. I've done things like Squid Game and then Citadel Diana on Amazon. But I've also acted, done adaptation, casting. I try to avoid producing because it's so much work. Uh, but I really appreciate the producers and have done it in various different forms. So I started doing telenovelas over a decade ago. And then when streaming started, dubbing jumped into that. And, obviously Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, Disney, HBO, Max, all those kind of things. So it's a small world that we all, that is growing. So
Thank you, Kate. And last but not least, Valeria is also a wonderful creative. I'll let her introduce herself as well.
Hey, Ayman. Thanks for having me. It's funny because we have a lot in common with Kate. I didn't know that. I also began my career in telenovelas, and I began in the dubbing world. My whole career, I've been involved with dubbing. It's been almost 18 years now. And I also began with the telenovelas, and I'm trilingual, so I began doing Spanish and English, and then, I'm sorry, Spanish and French, and then English. And then I got into the dubbing of Netflix and Hulu, Amazon, and same clients that were mentioned already. When we began dubbing streaming in English, and I am a voice director, casting director, and I also have my own production company, and I produce dubbing in my three languages.
Thank you, Valeria.
Thank you.
And quickly, I'm Ayman Saman. I'm an actor, dubbing director, on-camera director, slash, all of the things. I've done them all for the most part. So today we're going to get into, voice performance for dubbing, casting, directing for emotional truth, and, maybe we'll touch also on how AI might be shaking things up a little bit in the dubbing world and in the world in general. Um, so I want to start with a question, just generally for the three of you. Dubbing is often called an invisible art, right? And I want you, in your own words, how would you describe the true goal of a great dub?
What? Katie, do you want to go?
I'll jump in. I'll jump in. I'll start us off. So I think it is that, as you said, invisible, that you're trying to make a seamless experience so that when someone turns it on, they're getting the same emotional experience as they would from watching the original. But one of the benefits is like if you don't speak the original language, you're having to read subtitles, you miss a lot of performance because you can't actually watch their faces. So it enables you to watch their faces. So you want to make sure that the voices feel natural coming from that body in all the way, shapes, or forms. So, you know, sometimes that takes a little bit of interpretation, especially with language and the words that you choose and how that flows. You know, what makes it invisible isn't always mean that it's identical to the original. So there is a huge amount of interpretation that has to come in there in order to make it a seamless experience as much as possible. And there's a lot of opinions and voices that get involved in that, depending on the, especially the profile of the project, for how that language works and flows. But that's in general what you want it to be, is feel like it was written in English to begin with, but without losing the cultural nuance of the place that it is originating from.
Thank you, Kate. Brandon, would you like to add something from the perspective of like in the casting process?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's always about capturing the integrity of what's happening on screen, whilst also thinking about the audience you're presenting it to. The biggest conversation that's happening with me right now, because I mostly work in Korean content, is sometimes a lot of the Korean dubs, the original voices, the acting is a lot bigger than the American audience is used to. So finding the marriage of where these two cultures can meet in the middle and making it seem like a seamless product that, like Kate said, that when you turn it on, you don't know it's a dub. It's just in English, it's happening, and you're not taken out because you're so engaged by how the actors have invested in these characters because they become it. And when I'm casting, I always think, when I listen to samples, who is already the character innately in energy and in vocal imprint? And I think what's hard about the casting process in dubbing is oftentimes they won't get the photo, the voice imprint of these characters. So you're really relying on instinct and a little bit of luck on who naturally has that tone. And some actors are really smart about this. Some actors are within the Korean dub realm already, the English dub realm, and they know the actors already. So some of them are geniuses where they'll look them up. If they just happen to find out who, like, if you know Squid Games and you're auditioning for Squid Games too, some of them will know, oh, so and so is going to be on this second season. Let me listen to their vocal imprint from a previous show and see if I can like meet somewhere there. And I think it's two things. It's luck and also research for me. But all in all, when I'm listening to a sample, I'm listening for who is the character naturally without it being a character.
Yeah.
For like Squid Game 2, we had to hide everything. So we had to anglicize that for all the auditions so that nobody knew what they were auditioning for. So we had to anglicize the entire scripts when we send out audition sides. So you don't often, they purposely disguise things. So it's hard.
Right, right. Yeah. Valeria, what makes a great dub in your opinion, especially with like the multilingual perspective?
Valeria, you're on mute.
Valeria, you're on mute.
Duh. And that's important, not to be on
Yeah.
mute when we're
We
dubbing.
need to have a dub for your
Exactly. Be like blah 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 blah. Exactly. Hey, that's a good exercise. I was just saying that I have a very simple sentence for a good dub is it looks like the original, and that's a little bit like what Kate shared too. When you watch it, you want to be like not distracted by the fact that it's a dub. So you're watching it, and we're trying to make it as seamless as possible, like lip sync and acting wise. And for me, it's always like a mix of always trying to be as close as possible to the original. For the adaptation, for the cast, for everything, I love to, like Brandon, I love to match the original pitch. It's not what all people do in dubbing. That's why I'm like, for me, it's like getting as close as the original, so you watch it is seamless difference. You know, it's obviously a different language, but it seems like it's the same content because we want to respect the original creation and the original direction that was already chosen. So I like to, as a director, to follow what the original director decided. And of course, sometimes what Brandon said, you know, between Korean acting and English acting, that's a little challenging. It's very different. So it's kind of like finding the way to make it sound as natural as possible and respecting the original intent as possible.
So what do you think, the biggest like misconception that filmmakers or audiences have about dubbing, like currently, like people.
It's easy and fast.
Mm,
It's not. It's a whole process. You need to have an amazing adaptation first, and that takes, I would say, about 2 weeks to have a really good adaptation. And then it takes, I'm talking about feature, and series would be more obviously. And then it takes a long time, for the actors to, get into the, it's like we can't go fast, 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 fast and have the highest results. So it's time consuming. It takes a whole team because a good dub is a good adaptation, a good director, good actors, good casting, good mixing. So there's a lot of people involved in a good dub. So I feel like that's currently what we're facing is like clients wanting it faster and cheaper. And a good dub is a fraction of the production cost anyway and the time, but it's still a big part of the success you're gonna have in for the international audience. So it's worth taking the time, and it's worth taking the all the steps seriously to have a good result, so you can make more money with your content in another language.
And
yeah.
for those of you who don't know the process, what we get a translation that has like time codes that matches up, and then from there it's put into a program. Sort of depends on which company, what program, where it's adapted for sync and mouth, so mouth shapes, and for fluidity, for matching the characters, for matching the tone. So when we're saying adaptation, that's what we mean. It's not translation. It's taking from the translation to make it fluid in English and make it sync. And the other thing of just realizing how hard it is that original actors sometimes have months or even a year to prepare for these roles, and our actors are seeing it cold in the studio because of NDAs. It makes it, we can't send stuff out. So there's been a few Amazon projects, the only one that's had me do it so far, of being able to watch through 2 episodes with your leads before starting recording. That's extremely rare. And occasionally, if it's like, okay, they need to practice an accent or something, they'll get a script sent. But it's very, one of the biggest barriers is them having no context before coming in. So you as a director giving them entire context in order to be able to make it work. So they're coming in at a disadvantage from the original actors, but having to do just as well.
Thank you, Kate. Actually, and yeah, I was going to ask you about adaptation, but also since you've dabbled in adaptation as well, there's also the cultural element of like, because like direct translation is direct translation, but then there are certain jokes and certain, things that like culturally wouldn't make sense. And so could you give us like elaborate a little bit on like that process of like taking the literal translation and make it seamlessly meaningful to the audience that watch?
Yeah, I mean, comedies are the hardest, or any comedy bit, because as you said, it's so uniquely cultural. And it also depends on the piece. So there's been multiple pieces where I've been able to keep elements of the original language in there, especially if it's Spanish, or now Korean has enough awareness so you can keep things like endings of names. Sometimes it depends on the piece, depends on the client, depends on a lot, right? But there's sometimes where we're allowed to keep original flavors. Or sometimes when I've done Arabic, they've allowed to like keep little pieces that are thrown in there just to keep it sounding that you're not erasing the culture entirely, and depending on who the actors are doing it as well, if they have that fluency. So you have to think about that before. As an adapter, you have to know sometimes what the casting mindset's going to be before you can even do the script. So they're intertwined. But there's sometimes where we'll put, if you're just an adapter, I'll have 4 different versions in comments for some jokes to try and figure out if they'll play, and so then in the studio they can try them out. And so there's certain things that you're okay, like for Korean culture, age is huge, so there's insults and jokes around age and different how you respect or you're disrespecting somebody depending on if you're older and younger than them. And so there's like a moment in Squid Game 2 where we turned that into a your mama joke, which isn't literal, but like talking to Korean consultants and with the adapter and I, like, we realized like that's actually the closest, and it translates across a lot of cultures. Like, there's a famous thing in soccer where Zidane, who is a French soccer player, headbutted someone over a Yo Mama joke in a World Cup and lost the final, you know? So it's something that's happened in a lot of cultures in a lot of places. So there's sometimes like that where we take a little bit of license in order to make it feel more fluid when you're listening to it, because just saying, you know, you're old doesn't necessarily mean the same thing as insulting someone's age in a different way. So sometimes we take a little more license for the joke to land with comedy. So it really depends.
So I think I'm seeing that this in the chat, like someone's saying, does this conversation apply only to the Korean market? And I would say this applies to all different markets
Yeah, I
because
put a big no. No, all
yeah,
markets. It's
Yeah.
just because the examples right now, I'm guessing because Brandon's been working a lot on the Korean market, so the examples that were shared were Korean, but we do any kind of all the content we work on is like from a lot of different languages.
yeah,
Yeah, like even for me as a producer as well, when I'm working with, like, for example, if I know the content is going to be in Arabic, I try to get a director who speaks the language. Ayman is a great one for this, and we also try to cast actors who are very familiar with the culture. Whether, like, we did this show, and I can't even say the show's name yet because it's yet to be released, Ayman. But we
right.
worked on a show, and there was a lot of Egyptian characters, so we tried to cast Egyptian actors who would understand not just the language, but also just the family dynamic. And sometimes, we try to find adapters who even speak the language if we can. And there's always a compromise on how we can meet in the middle, because obviously it is such a beautiful art where we're crossing different cultures, and we're not just trying to say only this culture can direct this and that, but it's about meeting in the middle for me and having the conversation ahead of time. And I always say, like, if ever you encounter a project that you're not too familiar with the culture, it's really the responsibility on everyone to do their research ahead of time and to ask questions before you get in the booth.
Yeah.
Like, I had worked on this dub called Kian's, but no, not Kian's. It was called A List to Playlist, and it was all Korean pop. And I love K-pop, but some of the K-pop conversations were from, like, old school K-pop that I had no idea about, none. So I had to ask friends about this and research and make sure I knew what this world looked like. And I think that applies for all cultures, whether it's a Spanish dub, because an Argentinian show is going to be different from a Colombian show. Those are very different cultures. But having that conversation with the team is always the most important part when we're dubbing anything.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Brian, because there's always the dubbing in terms of directing or acting there's a cultural element and there's also the technical element. So, as a director, I've directed other languages other than Arabic. It definitely helps to understand the culture and usually, there's as a casting, a lot of the times we're casting in the world of that culture. So that's always helpful to have, like the actors who give in, some feedback on certain things that don't make sense culturally and stuff. So there's both. It definitely helps if everyone is from that culture, but it's not necessary and it's not feasible sometimes. But yeah, it's the onus is on the creatives to educate themselves about the project. Just like any part of the industry, if you're working on something, you educate yourself about it to do your best work. Um, so
Yeah.
while I have you, Brandon, I wanted to ask you, how do you feel that your background before coming in to dubbing, because you were in theater and acting, and how did your background help you transition into dubbing, or what elements of your background do you still currently are still beneficial when it comes to dubbing and casting and producing?
So I got into dubbing by complete accident. It was in 2019. I put my name on some list. It wasn't even the PGM list. It was just some random list on the internet. I get a call day before and they tell me to come in for a Netflix audition, not knowing what it was because I didn't know what dubbing was in 2019. And they had a thing called a VTK, and they still do this sometimes, but not all the time. But it was a vocal test kit where you go in and you're basically dubbing what's happening on screen without any knowledge whatsoever. And so I think because I had so much experience in theater and film, and I'm Filipino, so I've done karaoke my whole life, that like transitioning into dubbing was really seamless because I understand sound very well. And I think it made me better on not getting nervous with the unexpected. And that's what really dubbing is. It's a lot of unexpected planning where it's like you come ready to play as a producer, as a casting director, as an actor, and you kind of just got to play ball through the whole process, being excited about everything. And I feel like now that I'm coming back to the other end of the industry where it's more on camera, I feel like I'm more fearless as an actor because I've encountered so much unknowns in the dubbing world. And I think people, I want to go back to your question earlier about the misconception about dubbing. I think people think it's corny. And the reason why is because they don't know the process behind
Only when it's
it.
bad. Sorry.
Yeah, they think it's bad because they think about
It's
like the
corny when it's bad.
yeah, yeah, and I think people think about it the early 90s, 2000s like kung fu films where they dub it and it's like there's really no process behind it, but it's gotten so much better now. And you only hear about dubbing when it's bad. You never hear about dubbing when it's good. And so I feel like coming back into full circle, I wish people would have the conversation about, oh my God, that was a great dub. Like that was a really, really seamless dub. I mean, I thought Kate did a fantastic job on Squid Games too. I watched both the original and the dub because all my friends were on it, and it was a good balance of lip sync, but also performance and the compromise sometimes where sometimes the message was more important than the sync. And you kind of understand why certain decisions were made, but there's always decisions that have to be made in the moment that are more intuitive. And so I guess to come back to your question is I think anyone who's good in dubbing has good intuition,
Mm.
has really good intuition.
Yeah, yeah. That's a very yeah, that absolutely. I agree. Kate, what do you think? Like, I mean, you're a filmmaker and so you already came in with that knowledge. How do you feel that your background in filmmaking helped you with dubbing?
I was actually a full-time theater director when I was started dubbing, so I didn't actually get into filmmaking till later, but it kind of became this weird confluence of all my experience. So my undergrad was in anthropology as my undergrad degree, and then I studied Arabic, and then I did would pick up languages wherever I went. So I was like in France for a summer, and so I had to pick up crash course French, and my mom's Swedish, and I, self-taught, mostly self-taught Spanish, and, and Korean when I was working there for a summer or for a couple months. So having loving languages and loving cultures, and my graduate degree was in theater directing. So, and for that, my mentor was the head of the Hungarian Theater of Cluj in Romania, which is already a multilingual theater company. And so I spent my mornings in graduate school watching recordings of plays, mostly in languages I did not speak. So it was an extreme crash course in learning how to empathize and understand things in languages that you're not fluent in. And so that felt like weirdly prepared me for going into this world, and having directed in different mediums. So when I came to LA, I started doing film. I also do documentaries from having to work with non-actors and getting them to be comfortable on camera. And so having all that toolkit when you go into the studio is extremely helpful. But I think the cultural training is sort of the thing that helped me dive into it really early, and is part of the reason I got into it to begin with, because I got into it in like 2014 when the one of the actors from my mentor's theater in Romania moved here, and they started uh, a a dubbing studio, and they were doing novellas into English and Portuguese. So they hired a bunch of Brazilian actors and producers and everything. And that studio is kind of gone now, but it's really, I think it just tied together a lot of things, and it's always hard. I think that's what's exciting about continuing to do it, is that it's never routine. That I've done dozens and dozens of them at this point between acting, adapting, and directing, and it's really it's always tricky. But yeah, I think Valeria was saying knowledge and language is really helpful. So even if I'm not working in a language, I'm fluent in knowing how language works, and being able to be multilingual has helped. I wanted to comment one other thing too about the earlier thing about assumptions around cultures, because like and I've both been in this where they're just like, oh, so Arabic. So, and then they give you a show that's Moroccan, and you're like, cool. Like the difference between Arabic dialects can be as different as French and Spanish,
Yeah.
So, there's assumptions that people come in that, yeah, it helps that I can speak some, but it's not, and most of the actors are Egyptian or Lebanese that I'm working with, and so, but they've started recording things in those countries in English. So I know my alma mater, American University of Cairo in Egypt, there's a lot of my former classmates who are dubbing in English in Cairo because they wanted that accent, and it's kind of its own accent where it's this posh Egyptian English accent. So
Yeah.
they do dub things in English, not in English, primarily English speaking countries. So that happens too.
Yeah. Yeah,
And then
that's
can I jump in to
of
just
course.
yeah, I just want to because I'm following the chats and I'm taking it upon me to just
Thank
answer
you.
questions. And but I'm like, oh, there's a lot of things that are a little a few misconceptions of what the job is. So can I just very quickly just say what a dubbing director do and what a dubbing actor do? Because no, you don't
Please.
need to speak the language as a dubbing actor and not as a dubbing
Yeah.
director either. We're just saying it helps to know the original language. I mean, as a director, I'm trilingual and I really love to be able to work in the languages I speak or I understand Italian too and Portuguese, but you don't have to. And as an actor, you definitely don't have to speak the language unless we are casting specifically from the culture, from the original culture, because in the middle of the dub, we're going to have some of the languages included. Then we need bilingual actors. But it's not the main project. And most of the time, you do not need to speak the original language to dub as a dubbing actor. And also, the same person had a confusion about looping and dubbing. We're two different worlds. I mean, it's very linked, but we're different. Looping is original production, dubbing is post production. So we are two different crowds. Obviously, most of us do looping as well, but it's a different crowd, different directors. Usually, it's a coordinator, not even a director. And it's not the same people you reach out to. It's really hard to get into looping, just
Yeah.
telling you,
And
but it's
it's a
very
different art
different.
form.
It's a different conversation, and today we're only talking about dubbing.
Yeah.
Maybe that would be great to have a panel about looping, but that would be a different panel.
Right. And I think, the only maybe cross pollination between dubbing and looping is like the walla part of dubbing when we're doing like background, walla for shows and movies.
Yeah.
That's, a little similar there.
And actually, dubbing is more complicated than looping. Just so you know, so if you've done a lot of looping in your life and you're like, easy, I'm gonna get into dubbing, get ready to have a little bit more technical progress to make, because obviously doing lip sync things and not the same as just doing the lines with no visual.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, it's like doing Walla.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to touch on the, how because of NDAs and because of like, the streamers are, try to keep secrecy because the show hasn't been released yet. And so so the actors just come in cold every time. They don't have any pre-exposure to the scripts. I want to, I want to touch from a director's perspective and a producer's perspective. I want to touch on how do you help, the actors navigate that like side of the work where they're just coming in and jumping in on something they've never seen. They have no idea what they're doing. So what's the role of the director there aside just from directing them?
Is that for me or?
Yeah. While I
Oh,
have
okay.
you move, yeah.
I jump in then, and then we'll let Brandon and Kate give their take on that. Um, well, obviously, we'll always preview. So just I'm gonna give like a very concrete explanation of what we do in the booth. So the actors come in. He's being cast first. So usually they auditioned, or if it's a smaller part, usually we know them or we hear a sample of their voice and they're perfect for the role, so we cast them. I do casting as well. Sometimes the directors doesn't do the casting. In my case, I do the casting. So the actor comes in, he doesn't know, she doesn't know anything about the show, right? Because NDA. So the first thing I do is quickly explain what we're gonna do. Hey, this is a movie from Argentina, for example, and this is the story of blah 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 blah. And in the story, you are this person, and this person in the story, that's the role of your person. Your person is, and I try to describe who they are, their characteristic as a person, especially if they have an audition for it. So I don't know, like you're a little shy, but this is it, and this is your life story. Those things we know from the movie, right? Then we preview the scene. Sometimes we preview it twice, depends on the project, the complexity of the scene, or how the actors is used to work. I'm always open to hear how they want to do things, so we watch. Sometimes we watch twice, and then if they want to practice, they practice, and then we record. We usually record the whole scene, and then we go back and we redo the whole thing if we need to redo the whole thing, or we just redo the parts that need to be done again. But to prep them, I think it's very important to have the little introduction of the project. Hey, this is it. You know, this is the story. You're this person, and that's your relationship. Of from in the story, you are that person in that story. Um, so
Yes.
you know.
Thank you for that. And Kate, can we touch on also the fact that the actor doesn't even like see the whole show. They just come in and they just only see the parts that they're in. And so as a director, you're the one who has to navigate all these puzzle pieces for all the actors and to kind of keep them informed of the pieces.
Yeah, and it depends on which show of how long that takes for you to even give the actor the idea of the world. Like for Citadel Diana, which is a spy thriller, it's part of this huge universe that was created by the Russo brothers. And so there's an American series, there's an Italian series, there's an Indian series, and they all have interlocking things. So it would take me like 15 minutes just to explain the world before I could even begin a session, because so many, they're coming in with all this knowledge. I mean, it depends on their character, right? But a lot of these characters come in with more knowledge than you see on screen in a scene. And because it's all about hiding things. So sometimes for these, you have 2 hours in a session and 15-20 minutes of it is just getting them into the world and explaining the context and explaining the relationships. And so sometimes it's hard with scheduling where they're like, oh, this character is just here for one scene, so you only need an hour because that's your loops. And I'm like, but no, you don't understand. It's harder for those smaller characters. I would say, I, as an actor, actually enjoy doing what are called like incidentals. So the ones that have a few lines all over the place, because you're having to sometimes as an actor come in and play 8 roles in 2 hours, all with totally new contexts, all of which the director is your only real avenue, plus what Valeria was seeing of watching the scene, right? And so you're having to like, time of what Brandon is saying, like jump in and be like, okay, I'm gonna make these choices and do these things, and it can be really exciting. But more often than not, in shows where we are doing multiple rounds, those are the roles that the clients will be like, want you to recast. So that's happened sometimes. And sometimes because of how you initially cast, you thought they would really work in this track of incidentals, and then you're like, they work for 3 of those, these other 3, it doesn't work. And because if you're trying to save money, you're having to double stuff up, and so in shows where you have a budget, you can sometimes you recast that, and it's nothing personal to the actor, 90 times out of 9 times out of 10, because it's often just the name of the game of how quickly you're having to move, and just you're having to guess a lot sometimes of the casting, and how much you were able to give context. And sometimes I don't have context, so there's sometimes where I parts of shows are blacked out for secrecy sometimes before you start recording, and you don't get the final ones until you're there. So I've had that with shows. I've had where they're still recording them, like Valley of Tears, the one that you and I worked on, Iman, years ago. Like, I had no idea what the ending was. Yeah, the first 4 episodes, and then we had another 2 and another 2, and they were literally adding them and finishing them and then sending them to us, and then they were getting released on HBO the next week after we were finished dubbing. So like sometimes it's that quick and you're just doing your best. And then other times, like again with Citadel, it got pushed so much. We were just joking because we got an award for it, which is great. And we just had a party for that on Thursday night, and all of us were like, how long have we've been 2 years since we started this project? Like 3 of us have had babies from the time before we start, and that's rare. Like more often it's the like quick. But that one, I think why it won the award is we had time. Like we had the time to go back and do things and do it right and get
Yeah.
the actors to understand.
Which is very rare lately, and
Extremely rare.
And I think it's like mainly our enemy right now is like studios trying to get faster, and I'm like, you want quality or just want something that's going to be done in time and just ready to be streaming and nobody's kind of actually checking it? And it's very frustrating when you're like so attached to the quality of the product you're going to come up with as a team. And yeah, it's something we're facing a lot, I think, lately.
I think, a big part, like Brandon said, like the intuition plays a really big part in this. I mean, it's just as an artist in general, like we're all artists wherever we are in the industry, and I think relying on intuition is really helpful because of the speed and all of that. If you let your intuition, like if you're open and you let your intuition, you keep going. I wanted to ask about like in terms of what is the importance, like if we have filmmakers in the audience, and so what is the importance of having planning the dubbing process in your project if you're a filmmaker now, and for international exposure, because like nowadays, it's not enough to be local, it's not enough to be just gearing towards. So is it important now for filmmakers to keep that in mind while they're actually planning their in their pre-production process? Do you guys have anything to chip in on this?
I
I
think
do.
oh, sorry, go
I,
ahead, Brandon.
I think, you really have to think about the plan of what market you want your film to reach, what territory. Just because there was a moment in time where dubs were getting ordered left and right with no plan really what to do with them. And so if you're trying to reach the Philippine market, you would know that the Philippines already speaks English. You wouldn't have to dub it in English. You can just keep it there. But if you're trying to reach, let's say, somewhere in Mexico, you'd probably want to dub it in Spanish because in Mexico, dubs are pretty popular. And I think the conversation here is dubs are often the afterthought. They think, okay, we have the product now. Okay, let's do the dub. Why not? But there isn't really kind of like strategy, or at least before there wasn't as much strategy. Nowadays, I think the conversations have been churning about what are we trying to accomplish with those territories. I think it's a little different for independent filmmakers because a lot of the times you're on a shoestring budget and you're just trying to think about distribution and thinking about your next film festival. And you're not, some people do think long term, but I don't think, at least within the independent film market, especially with shorts, they don't think in that respect. So I guess all this to say, for someone who's an independent filmmaker, if you see your show or your film being on a global market, awesome. Why not dub it in a different language if you can? But for now, I think you should just focus on getting it to the next, I don't know, the next kind of platform that you can get it onto, because it's really costly to make films. So I couldn't imagine how much it would be to do a dub as an independent filmmaker and how much that would cost at this point and to do a good job on it.
Yeah. And I've also seen, like, in some of the projects, they're not independent, but like, if you have sometimes, if the actor is bilingual, the original actor, the on-camera actor, they're actually they get to dub their role in the language, which is amazing, that when that happens. So that I don't know if that's that could be pre-planned or what. Kate, have you experienced, like, have you actually
Yeah,
dubbed?
there's about 4 or 5 projects that I've had original actors dub themselves on. And some of them come over for like for this one show, Sam is Saxon. They came over for 3 weeks from Germany to dub themselves, the lead. And so then the only sort of pre-planning is that's written into their contracts often when you're working with actors from the beginning. You write a first refusal for your own dub. And then for the Citadel Honey Bunny, which was in India, it's so common for them to dub themselves into English. That's why there isn't as much Hindi dubbing in the US done in the US. And so we ended up doing it, and then the original actors, the schedule changed and the original actors were available to dub themselves. So then half of ours ended up getting dubbed by the original actors after we'd already done a version. So so it's in the contracts, and it can get messy when there isn't a plan. Like that one, they were like, if there's time, we'll get the original actors. If not, so they actually did it twice. So but of course those original actors are such big names in India, it was worth it for them to do that. But I've done a lot of like remote ones as well. So for smaller parts, even for people who have those in their contracts of right of first refusal to dub themselves. So that's been more common. So there was a lead there's sometimes where Mexican actors are able to come up here too, which is that's happened a couple times for shows. But it has to be often shows where an accent is okay with the context.
Yeah.
And they have to be bilingual, which is like, only, people who actually speak the other language can actually have that in their contract. I mean, you can't have in the contract, yes, I want to dub myself into English. We don't speak English, obviously. So there's not that many. I feel like it's not like a very common thing because it's like it takes like a bilingual actor
Yeah.
to be able to dub himself or herself.
But English and Spanish probably the most common for when they're going back and forth.
Yeah, I mean, I feel German. You mentioned German. German
yes.
is also very common because a lot of German speak pretty good English. So, and then we had the case also in French with the Looming Tower. Remember, Ayman? What's his name? Dubbed himself. The main character. Help me out.
Yeah. I wish I dubbed myself too, but
I know I would have loved to have you dub yourself, but that wasn't an option in there because we were dubbing the show into French.
Yeah.
Remember? So actually the original actor did it in English and then he dubbed himself into French because he's bilingual, so he was able to do that. Just to come back to the planning of like dubbing or not dubbing, I feel like it also depends on the platform you're gonna be like do you want to do a streaming platform with your project? Then they're gonna ask you to dub it. And sometimes the platform is dubbing it, but the thing that we've been saying lately is sometimes the platform buys the things when it's already completely dubbed and already ready to distribute. Depends on the platforms, obviously, but Netflix usually dubs their own stuff that they choose, but other smaller platforms may actually distribute your movie when it's already dubbed in different languages. So I feel like it depends on where your market is. If you're an independent filmmaker and you're going to send it to international markets, they may ask you to have at least subtitles. So I know because I've done subtitles for documentary shorts that they were like sending it into Spain or France, and they're like, "Oh, it's good, right? It's in English," and they're like, "No, we don't accept it if it's not subtitled." So you just have to plan in advance what you want to do with your thing, and if you want to have an idea of cost, I'm always happy to help, like, figure it out for you if you want, because I'm producing also dub, but I'm just saying, like, it's not that hard to know how much it would be. You can ask quotes around and like make sure that you ask quotes to people who know how to dub. And so you have an idea of what the cost would be. It's not that hard, to know.
Thank you, Valeria. So I think at this point, let's open it up for some questions before the hour. And guys, feel free to just turn on your mic and ask directly.
Hi, my name's Kathy, and I have a question regarding dubbing. I didn't know, to Brendan's point about bad dubbing, the only reference I can think of is when, like Carmen Jones or West Side Story, where the actors could sing and they used a trained actor. But I'm wondering, in today's market, can, for instance, a black actor dub for a white actor? So if you're talking a movies like Black Panther, is there enough diversity for enough black people to dub, or can they dub themselves, or would it be offensive for, would it be considered an offense for white actors to dub all those voices?
A
I can
very
speak candidly about this. I would not hire a white actor to voice um, a black actor. For me personally, just because for me it just looks it looks weird, and I've noticed when actors even get that opportunity to do that, they feel uncomfortable doing so. So I would never want to put any actor in an uncomfortable position to try to mimic a certain kind of sound or voice in any capacity. Now, to answer back your question, Kathy, can a black actor dub a white actress on screen? Why not? If it's similar vocal types, I don't see why not. There's plenty of black actors who dub in anime for English, and there's never a problem there. For me, it's not like a black and white issue. It's more so, can this actor honor that performance vocally, and will that seem seamless? And from my experience, I have not seen where a white actress has done a seamless performance as a black character on screen. And I've never tried it. I just don't think it's something that people would do nowadays, if I'm being very honest.
Okay, thank you for your answer. I appreciate it.
And often we get what are called show guides where the clients also, so Netflix has had panels and other sorts of things talking about this exact thing, about like voice representation for on-screen representation and how that works. And so it is, yeah, there'll be these guides that we often get that say it needs to be specifically blah 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 for these kind of characters, right? So there's also times that goes for also issues around ability. So sometimes it'll be around race or ethnicity, and sometimes, like I did a show that was all the leads were on the spectrum. So you want to cast that, or characters who have Down syndrome, or trans characters, or any of those things that match. You also are trying to cast authentically with people who can understand. It also helps from a performance standpoint. It's like it makes everything better because they understand the life story and can bring things more. So it goes across for um, in a lot of different scopes that you're having to consider when you're casting is in a lot of those life histories. But in the other direction, a lot of my favorite actors that I work with all the time are Black, and they do like different ones for different shows. Like it's like they've been in shows that are Korean, shows that are we don't often, but I also have friends who are um multilingual as well, right? And so sometimes I've had to have people who are fluent in French who are also Black, so you have to find like sometimes these people who have extremely specific needs within it as well. So
I think in a way it ultimately goes back to authenticity in delivery, similar to like, casting on camera. You have to cast the actor that authentically reads and sounds like the actor on the screen, so that again, so that it stays invisible, so like nobody, like the audience can it doesn't turn them off from watching, or they just, it's seamless. So I think for the most part, from my experience over the past several years, is that we try to stay authentic as possible to the roles, as much as possible, in terms of casting.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Hi, my name is Mario, and I have a question. If you want to start in dubbing, do you need a reel, just like in a regular, like an actor, like an on-camera actor? If so, well, where do you put it? Like, do you need some agent to put it in, or I don't know if you can talk about this. Also, I'm a bilingual actor, but as well, I can speak some other two languages, and I was wondering if looping is like the conversation that some characters have in the background, and maybe I can bring that to that. So I don't know. You can talk about that.
Can I answer those two questions very quick?
Sure.
For demos, you don't need a specific demo for dubbing. I mean, if you've been doing a lot of dub, it's nice to have a visual demo of your dubs, but you don't have to. So usually it's really great to have a good narration demo, because the most important thing is to hear your natural voice. Of course, we're going to check your background as well, what kind of acting you've done before. If you're new to dubbing, the important thing is to know, are you an actor, obviously, and have you done theater on camera? What have you done? So we're going to check what you've done. So making sure to share all the materials that you have, your narration demos, and also anything that you have, any information that you have in that same email, everything in one email. Because as a lot of people like sending me messages and be like, hey, I would like to be considered, but then they send you like a piece of information, another piece, and usually casting directors are a little busy, so just send them, ask first, is it okay for me to send you my demos, general demos, or whatever work I've done, because I would love to get into dubbing. And you can send that to casting directors, you can send that to your agent too, of course, if you have an agent. And for looping is again, it's a very different worlds, different people involved, and it's yes, of course, if you're multilingual, it would be great for you to get into looping. I'm multilingual as well, and I do a little bit of looping, but love to do more looping. And looping is really hard to get into because it's all friends of friends and who knows who. So I can't help with that. You can send messages to looping directors, coordinators, and just present yourself and send your demos in different languages. That's all I can say.
Can I answer that question too?
Yeah.
Like what Valeria said too, I think it's appropriate to send your sample, but for me, just because the internet's so weird, I always prefer that I get referrals by someone I know. So if you know someone in the world, I would say have them connect you via email, just because I have my phone number in my signature, and I've gotten in the past some weird calls from random people just because I answered the email and forgot to delete my phone number. So I would say if you have a referral, have them connect you via email. For me, what's helpful is if you're handling something theatrical, like a script where you're just talking in that dialogue and not necessarily having a scene partner and cutting them out, just so I can hear how you handle theatrical scripts. Narration's great, but sometimes I find that some people get kind of flat on their narration reads, so it's a little hard to tell how they would handle beat to beat. And for my multilingual friends, I would like to hear a standard American sample if you speak multiple languages. For example, I had this brilliant actress named Jessica Rookwood. I didn't know she was Australian. And she just had I had a standard American sample of her in my drive for years. And it wasn't until I worked with her that I was like, oh my God, you're Australian, but I could not tell. Because oftentimes in the dubbing world, if you have a bit of an accent, I do think people have a different kind of approach to how they cast you. And
Can I add something, Brandon? I want to say something that I tell everybody who tells me those examples. What native language is for this Australian person?
Oh, it's English, of course.
English, of course. So that's way easier to have a standard American demo if your native language is English and not another language. Just wanted to say, because it's kind of hard, even if you're multilingual, be like, can you do everything with completely standard accent when it's not your native language? And saying, because of Mario also who asked the question, it's kind of hard to have a standard American, completely, seamless.
Oh,
demo. Just saying, and it's like, whoa, yeah, Australian is a little easier.
I completely agree, Valeria, but I do notice that if people have, we've said it earlier too, that if people speak multiple languages and everyone in the cast has a specific kind of like dialect or accent, they tend to stay within that world. And I just want to open people up, just for myself at least too. When I'm speaking Tagalog, I have to sound like I'm from the Philippines when I'm speaking it. And then if I don't, that automatically gets me out of the race in that castability. And that's just the plain truth of it all. And I'm not saying it's fair or anything, but to give yourself a real shot in the dubbing world, you really have to give yourself that kind of sample to be
Yeah.
out there.
Well, the good thing is like I feel like we're talking about diversity, and thank God sometimes, and it's not in all the shows. I also love to have like a little bit of flavor because I have a little bit of an accent, and I'm an actor too, so I feel the pain. But sometimes most of the dubs we can't have any kind of accent, but some of them lately have been open to having a little bit of different accents. Obviously, that has to make sense, has to
Yeah.
be matching the original, but so just to tell people who have an accent, it's not impossible to get into dubbing. It's going to be more complicated and more difficult, and you're going to have less work than people who have a standard accent. Yes.
But then
Yeah.
there'll be times where you'll be my savior because I need something
Exactly.
right. So that's the balance. And but as Brandon said, if you have that authentic accent and then a not, I saw a question about Americans playing Brits. I mean, that's something that we do see happen, you know, and again, sometimes you try and cast authentically, but there's been times where like I've done auditions being like, you know, authentic British accents, and I would not have been able to tell, and you know, British friends of mine wouldn't have. And I mean, and I think a lot of us who work in this industry do have a good ear for languages and accents. And so, and there will be somebody along the line. Like I had to read, there's one character who spoke in French and English, but she was from Alsace, which is like on the German French border. And so one of the producers on that show was from Paris, and she's like, this character needs to have more of a Parisian accent. So we had to go back and redo some things to get more of a Parisian accent, even though she was fluent in French. So sometimes it gets that granular with accents, but sometimes you also, as in that, if it's important enough, you can also sometimes still get coaching. But again, I don't want to say that's always, that's only again in rarer circumstances. So you basically have to be able to come in there and in 2 hours be able to execute it without practice. So that's the level of whatever accent you're going to do, whatever language you're going to do. If you say you do it, that's what you have to be able to do.
And I would say my pet peeve about fake accents. So, because we're talking about authenticity and diversity and representation, I feel like fake accents are not what we're looking for. I mean, hopefully not what mostly most directors are looking for.
Yeah,
I
just
mean, just go for authentic. Go for authentic.
don't claim that you know that you can do something that you can't, because you'll be wasting everyone's time, and then you know that's gonna damage, you know, your opportunities on the long run. Embrace who you are, and trust that like your work will come to you as you are, and just, you know, trust in your talent. So I think we're at the we're at the top of the hour. I want to thank Brandon, Kate, and Valeria for their time and their energy. Thank you guys so much.